with some genuine, sincere intuition, it's possible to see and get a glimpse that there's really not just deep under the surface, but more and more people directly and concretely responding to this thing that's happening, both in terms of openings, even awakenings, and what we see. And this is, to me, is elicits great compassion. But we understand there's tremendous resistance and reaction to the force descending, and that's not bad. Remember, this is all the Divine Mother's place. So we have a tendency to say, look at all the hate, all the polarization. It shouldn't be this way. We should all be like Aurobindo, where everything's perfect, right? So, but it's not, that's not it. We see in Aurobindo and we see around the planet, this is the mother. The image I love the most is the mother has her divine broom and she's sweeping and sweeping, and the dust comes up and we say, oh my God, get rid of the dust. We don't trust mother to dust well. So my sense is we can relax, we can trust the mother. And I'm going to talk towards the end. It looks like we're starting. So I'm going to talk towards the end about what each of us can do, non-do, to become more of an instrument for this amazing divine change that's occurring. But I'll just make one suggestion now. Does anybody have trouble with the idea that you, as a supposed separate person, that your mind, your heart, your life, and your body in some way are deeply inwardly connected with all people on the planet? Is that something that everyone can kind of at least entertain as a possibility? Okay. I'm trying to speak to skeptics as well as longtime integral yogis. Okay, so let's take something that happens, I would guess, to everyone every day. Actually, I'll ask for a show of hands. Is there anyone here who in the last 24 hours has not experienced at least 1 minute or a few seconds of some kind of reactive negative emotion? Show of hands? Okay. So in the last year, so no anger, no disappointment, no anxiety, no tension. No hands. Good. Okay. So I would suggest that given your faith, the Shraddha, what is called in Sanskrit is known as Shraddha, given your deep sense of Shraddha that the mother is bringing her force into the world, that there is this collective connection. Here's my suggestion. Here's a simple thing. So before this presentation, there's a little stage fright, right? It's a little, just tiny for me. A tiny bit of little tension, which was generally very good. It's good to have that. As a longtime pianist and performer, if you don't feel nervous beforehand, you're not going to have the energy to really play. But let's say in your own body, in your own mind, in your own vital and heart, bring to mind that sense of just a tiny bit of a little bit of tension, right? And what do we do when we have an aversive, unpleasant experience? To be honest, come on, be really sincere and honest. I know we're all yogis, we all accept it, but if you look at your deep, instinctive, vital, lower vital, you will most likely see an aversion, a wanting to push it away, right? Okay. Now, we're not going to be averse to the aversion. We're not going to reject the aversion. If we allow it, and we allow, this is the most important, because many therapies talk about this. You allow it, you accept it, the trauma, the anxiety, whatever, and that is very healing. But from a yogic perspective, I'm going to say one more thing. I have no doubt, for whether you're here for the first time or many years, every person here has some level of connection to what Sri Aurobindo and the mother called the psychic being. We can call it the vast, infinite spaciousness, the more removed, timeless aspect of the self, the placeless place, deep, infinite, in the infinite depths of our heart, where we're always connected to the mother. It may just be moments of joy, moments of peace, moments of undescribable connection, a sense of infinite spaciousness, or just a quiet moment of delight that seemed to have no causeless delight. Okay. Next time that you're aware of that moment of tension, fear, anger, sadness, frustration, craving, allow it to be there, and then take a moment, not so much by effort, but through devotion, through love, through that natural aspiration we all have naturally by grace, because we're here. You wouldn't be here if you didn't have this aspiration. This aspiration we all have to be of service to the whole, to the collective. So you're there, you may feel the tension in your throat, you may feel a little pressure here. You just notice it. It's just vibrations. You just notice it. And you tune into that larger context, psychic, spiritual, whatever. And from there, from that place, it may be verbal, mother, take this is yours. Let this mind body be an instrument for the further evolution of consciousness of the whole. It may not be verbal. You may be so familiar with this, it may just be a tuning in, allowing the tension, whatever it is, opening up to that larger context, and then the heart just calls for that to be taken. And that's it. In that moment, your mind, body, your person, and can you feel in the heart a little jump of delight to know this is possible for each of us? In that moment, you become more of an instrument that affects the entire evolution. Now, if your ego takes this and says, "Oh, isn't that great? I'm an instrument for the evolution," you've just kind of closed the door, right? So it takes a little finesse, little subtlety, little insight, little intuition. Okay, that's the introduction. So your role, our role in the collective shift of consciousness. I see, and I'm going to talk personally for a bit about my sense of it back from my teens and up through now, but I see over the last 50 years, two major signs of this. Increased openings. Seems to me, thousands of people are having genuine, this is my sense, many may disagree, genuine awakenings. Now, I'm not talking about supramentalized or even high spiritual, but there's a kind of shift that seems to be taking place. More and more people where they're shifting out of their ordinary sense of I'm here and local to the sense of I as an infinite field of consciousness. Now, there are many, many, many realizations, and I'm not going into any details here about that. I think Devashish may have covered that a few days ago, but this is not a philosophy presentation, but there seem to be, I'm meeting more people who seem to have this opening of one of many kinds. So increased opening and, which we've all seen very much recently, increased resistance. Right? So from the 50s, when this descent occurred, we see a period where science, politics, economics, the arts, entertainment media, these little flowerings of new possibilities and people coming in, no, we have to go back, we have to stop this, and so increased opening and increased resistance. All of it being beautiful. All of it part of the divine play. I'm going to probably keep reminding you, watch for the tendency of the mind to say, increased opening, that's great. Resistance, that's bad. We get back into this dualistic, right, okay. Thank you for the head nods, it's helpful. So here's my story. Starts in the first I can remember is 1965. Now, I was 13. This is long before I heard of any of this stuff. I was still a devout atheist at the time, quite dogmatic. This is the answer. All you spiritual, religious people, you're all superstitious fools. Okay. I remember seeing people and having this sense, I couldn't put any words to it, and says, these people are in touch with something different. And they'd be anywhere, kids in school, someone on TV or hearing on the radio, a writer. Something is coming in. I couldn't say what it was. About 4 years later, I had taken a year off from high school and was doing full-time music. And I happened to read a book that year. I had become an agnostic at the time. A friend of mine told me, Don, not everyone thinks God is this old guy up in the sky with a beard. And being an old guy now with a beard, I kind of appreciated that. So I read this book, and the book said, a little passage on page 126 of the book, I remember this, and it said, religions were never about dogma and faith. They were always about an experience. The experience was in italics. And I looked around, and there was nothing but God. Everything was just luminous with a sense, everything's God, and that this is why we're here. The next thought was, how could I have lived for 17 years and no one told me this? And I had this vision of throngs of people wandering cities around the world, asleep, just caught up in their narratives and stories, completely asleep to what was happening. And the other thing was, I also got this sense that my lifetime was about something to do with psychology and music. And I was a musician. I had no interest in psychology. And it took me about 20 years to figure out how that fit in. 6 years after that, I'll get through my story quickly. I'll get back to you guys soon. 6 years later, a friend handed me, most of you know this book, Adventure of Consciousness. I got to the chapter on consciousness. I read a few lines and said, this is it. This is what had come into my mind 6 years ago. This is what I was looking for. And I also thought, oh, it's done. I have nothing to do. I started giving people the book and saying, see, it's all there. And they're like, huh, that's like silly. So that didn't work. So flash forward to 1992. I'm at the New York Open Center. It's one of those places like Esalen with a million different, you got Vedanta and Sri Aurobindo one day, and shamanism and witchcraft and everything else, healing your chakras and chakring your healing or whatever. And I'm at a Tibetan Buddhist dream yoga workshop. And this couple is next to me. The woman is a resident at Yale Medical School, and the guy, Ed, is a physiologist. And I'm telling Ed, isn't it amazing? If you had gone to me in 1970 and described to me what's happening in the world now, in 1990, I'd say, oh, that must be like 2020. He doesn't respond. He turns to his wife and says, did you hear that? She says, yeah, you were saying the same thing just last night, exactly the same thing. Flash forward another 8 years. Jan and I studied Sufism for 2 years with this wonderful, wonderful Welsh teacher, Llewellyn Vaughan Lee. And Llewellyn describes his practice for many years as being very traditional. It had a lot of connection to the divine feminine, but it was the individual liberation, all that. He said in 2000, everything changed. He became aware of the presence of the Divine Mother in the world, and that spiritual practice was no longer for the individual. It was about a collective evolution. This is so beautiful and so amazing to hear this. Jan and I studied informally with a disciple of Paramahansa Yogananda, Roy Eugene Davis, from 2006 to 2019, when he passed at the age of 89. And Roy increasingly, I found over the years, talked about entering the new era. His teacher's teacher, Yogananda's teacher, Sri Yukteswar, was quite well known in India for recalculating the yugas. Many Indians had thought that Kali Yuga would last for another 100,000 years. He said, no, the new era actually began to start, the tail beginning of it started about 2 centuries ago, and we're just entering in the 20th and 21st centuries, the beginning of a vastly new, more awakened age. And he spoke more and more about this. Almost up to date. Now, I noticed in 2012, speaking to people, friends in the yoga and elsewhere, that people talked about having people who'd meditated for years suddenly having an ease of access to the silence, the all-pervading, boundless, nameless, formless silence. I noticed this myself. And finally, about 5 years ago, I had this friend, Lot Kelly, who's been teaching awakening practices for of about 30, 40 years. He went to Nepal to study Mahamudra and Tibetan Buddhist practices back in the early 80s. We met in the 1980s. He was a therapist at the time, and I kept telling him, Locke, you should take those practices and use them with people. No, that's not, they're not ready for it. So I come across a video. Turns out he's having a dialogue with Adyashanti, a teacher, a non-dual teacher in California. And he's been talking about how over the last 10, 15 years, first of all, he woke up. He had that profound shift in identity. And he found that more and more people over the last 20 years would respond to these advanced practices that were originally meant for monks who dedicated their life for decades. He talked about having a plumber come to his home in Riverside Drive. You may hear my cat playing my piano. Thank you, on me. I'm just going to take her off the keyboard. Okay, there she is. Hello. So he talked about having a plumber come to his home, and he taught him this advanced, that the plumber was saying he'd just been feeling so depressed, that life was devoid of meaning, and he was listless and had no energy. So Locke taught him this sort of basic presencing Tibetan Buddhist advanced Mahamudra teaching. He got it right away and said, I haven't felt this good in years. It was wonderful. And he's traveling around the world offering these teachings. So that gave me courage, along with, do you all know Dan Siegel? Some of you have heard me talk about him forever. Just very quickly, he talks about the wheel of awareness. He teaches this to kindergarteners. So the awareness is in the center, and all that you're aware of is out here. It's very simplistic, but for example, one student who was learning this was a bully. His 5-year-old child, he didn't like being a bully, but he couldn't control his impulses. Well, he learned the wheel of awareness. So the teacher told him, next time you feel like, punching out Johnny, go to your hub, go to the center. In 3 weeks, he was no longer a bully. Well, meanwhile, they interviewed Johnny, who had been put in a different class to stop him from being bullied. And they asked Johnny, who also had been studying the wheel of awareness and some basic brain things, said, Johnny, how are you feeling now after being bullied? Well, I understand that whatever his name was, his prefrontal cortex wasn't developed and he can't really control the reactions from his amygdala. So I just really feel like I'm so glad to hear that he's happier now. And I think that's wonderful. 5-year-olds. Isn't that wonderful? It's so wonderful. So Jan and I felt like we had been, as again, some of you know, we've been teaching various forms of mindfulness, very kind of, hidden spirituality, right? Well, you can't talk about awareness. Well, suddenly Locke and Dr. Siegel and Les Femi and even a bunch of people all over the world are teaching this to ordinary people. So we developed this course, which I'll tell you about in a moment. I want to say one more thing. Moving to Asheville, North Carolina is kind of a center for New Age type things, but there's a lot of serious stuff going on here. And if you talk to people, not everyone, but I used to get, I did several thousand psychological evaluations, and I started doing children and teens more in the last few years. And I'd have kids, one kid came and he was 12. He said, well, Doc, every night I go to sleep and I feel like this large infinite space opens up. I just contemplate, how does that relate to the world? And there are not a few kids I get who are asking questions like this. And 40% of young people nowadays claim to be severely anxious and depressed. But I wonder if that anxiety and depression is from feeling there's something new, there's something else that they can't find reflected in society. And that brings us to our course. So this is not a sales pitch. I just want to tell you in the connection with this collective shift. So Jan and I developed this term, open heartful awareness. For those of you familiar with Sri Aurobindo terms, the open awareness is more the taste of the self, the spaceless, timeless self. And the heartful awareness is meant to evoke the sense of presence, of love, devotion of the psychic being. We don't talk about that in the course. Okay. We do find we're looking to transcend old dogmas, old religions, old ideas. So we do use the brain. We talk a lot about brain programming. We also, and I know as a therapist, and anyone here who's done therapy knows that therapy has a tendency to get people very focused on their little selves. So we do about three weeks out of the 12-week course to connecting the inner and outer. So we're not the spiritual people who say, just meditate and get to open heartful awareness and the world will be fine. We're definitely not the people who say, get out there and fight for social justice and get rid of racism and sexism and all that, and everything will be fine. But we do say, it's all one. It's all connected. And just like I said, we don't tell people in the course that you're collectively connected to this vast collective consciousness and it's part of the shift. But we do say very simply, if you are walking around during the day and you're learning to connect to open heartful awareness, and rather than fighting and lost in conflict, allowing these various so-called negative emotions and reactivities to be there without pushing them away, and allowing the natural, here's one of our scientific things. It's actually true. The nervous system does have a natural tendency towards greater integration, right? So since we can't talk about grace and the integrative process of the supramental, we'll talk about the natural integrative process of the nervous system, which some of you who nodded your head about Dan Siegel probably know about. And if you're walking around with this, the joy of knowing it's possible to allow this integration to occur, that's going to affect every person, every shopkeeper, every worker, co-worker, every classmate, every cashier at the grocery, every person you come in contact with. So coming back to my play at Earth Fair today, by having that message board, by singing together, by talking about these things, we're just offering, allowing the attachment fruits are there, but just offering other possibilities, other ways of being in the world that are in harmony with this collective shift, whether or not people's minds know about it. Okay, so that brings me to the last portion of this presentation. It's very short. I hope people will join in later with some questions and comments and criticisms if you like. People who know me know I love to debate and argue, as long as you know I'm right. But no, okay. So the last thing here is, what can we do? How can each of us contribute as instruments to evolution? I spoke of it before, but let me say a little bit more. So in the language of the yoga, we would say, bring the psychic being in front. I'm going to be daring enough to say, perhaps some of us here don't quite know concretely what that is or how to do it. And those of us who think we know may not know as much as we think we know. But I would say, if you're here, you have the aspiration for that. And it's not really a technique, but I have found over 45 years of practice that this aspiration is not something that I do or I make happen. I do not cultivate it. It is not Don who is making that happen. Every one of us here has that aspiration, is alive. And it's the mother, it's that fire of Agni, the fire, the divine light in our heart, and all that she asks of us. Just tuning our attention to that. There's a beautiful, beautiful phrase. I used to have it as a screensaver on my computer. I'm not going to quote it exactly. The mother says to a disciple, whenever that flame of aspiration and love goes out, light it again, light it again, and again. If it goes out, light it again. And there you have it. There are many, many practices. Mindfulness is one. There are many practices. Service, singing. But I have found again and again that allowing the mind to be, allowing the quiet mind to be, not fighting with the thoughts, just allowing it to be there, and tuning into this light, this flame, this joyful devotion that is naturally present. It's magic. It's just magic. This may sound like a little self-serving thing, but here's an example. When you're in tune with your, by grace, when you're in tune with your Dharma. In 2000, I had just taken my licensing exam to be a psychologist. And I went across the street. There was Borders bookshops were still open back then. And I was looking through some books, and the closest to a voice I'd ever experienced came to mind. And the voice said, "It's time to write the book." And I'm like, who said that? Well, I thought about it. I thought, I've been studying the integral yoga psychology for 25 years, and I think it is time. So Jan joined me eventually, about a year later. But over the next 2 weeks after I heard this voice, I started saying to Jan, I just wish some rich guy would come and give me enough money so I can, have time to devote to this. Now, I'm not recommending this as a get-rich scheme, but it's what happened. I got an email 2 weeks later. Someone had gone to India to talk to my friend Matthijs, and Matthijs said, "You should talk to Don. He's obsessed with this stuff." So I got an email, and eventually this guy says, "I'd like to give you $25,000 so you can have time to devote to writing this book on Sri Aurobindo and the mothers into yoga psychology." Now, that hasn't happened again like that, but I have found, everyone here knows the old saying, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. This seems to be more and more true of all of life. And part of this collective shift, you may have noticed. If you're tuned to synchronicities, have you noticed, those of you who've been on the planet for more than, you're all over, is it safe to say you're all over 20? Okay. So those of you on the planet more than 20 years will have noticed, you may have noticed these coincidences, these connections happening more and more. This is something I've noticed. And I've noticed regular, those people we divide from us, people like us on the street talking about these things and getting it, and really getting it. This is a sign of increasing oneness, this connection. So when there is that willingness by grace, always, always, always by grace, when there is that willingness to be guided, to tune into that aspiration, to let the mind settle, not try to make it quiet, let it settle. This sense of oneness, this sense of presence, right now, if I just offer the simplest reminder of presence, I trust everyone here knows what I'm talking about. If I offer a gentle reminder of silence, and to me those have a different quality. If one uses mythical terms, one might say the silence has a more masculine kind of quiet, peaceful quality. The presence has a kind of shimmering, vibrating, alive, joyful quality. And they're not two. They're not two. So you see, it takes nothing but a willingness to pause for the shortest moment to remember that's here, and that's it. And that may guide you to use a technique, maybe use a mantra. That may guide you to call a friend who you just remembered was in need, and just call them. Drop an email, a little chat, WhatsApp, or whatever people are using nowadays. So I would say, Sat Prem said this in one of his books. He said, truth is just so extraordinarily simple. We all have had lifetimes. I'm going to assume everyone here, you're tuned into this. We've all had lifetimes of renunciate karma. I'm not saying you were a monk, but we've gone through millennia where what it's about is like, you got to work hard, get away from all those temptations, quiet your mind, do all this stuff, right? This is a different age. It's the era of the divine feminine. It's the age of allowing, the age of transmutation and transformation, which cannot possibly be done by the little me. And these words that are coming up are by grace. Don doesn't know how to think of these things. The part that isn't quite right, that's Don's contribution. The little stumblings, the confusion, but whatever of value is coming through here is hers. Hers, his, it, that, they. I get young people. Someone recently, I knew an unusual acronym that kids use. He said, "You get young people points for that." So, I mean, you know to use the they pronoun, right? Gender. Okay, I get points for that. You all get points for that. Those people who nodded, you get young people points for that. And I'm not off topic. Those young people, do not think of them. They're young in body, but there are many, many old souls coming in who are. They're like, hey, you old folks. Not all of you. Those of you who are over 20. Hey, you older folks. Get with it. Stop looking at us as bodies. We've come here like, you were starting out in the 50s and 60s, but you kind of screwed it. You kind of, dropped the ball, right? So we got to come in, climate change, pandemic, wake you guys up. Like, come on, it's time, right? So, okay. With that, now how do I get past the shyness? I really want to invite you. I have nothing more to say. Jump in. I can be provocative, provoke someone. Yeah. Anyone have any questions, comments, objections? Again, I see at least two scholars here who are very eager to often to give objections. They're both smiling. They know who I'm talking about. They're going to turn off their video soon. No, seriously. Of course, you're welcome to ask about the course. I would love to hear, apart from more, scholarly, knowledgeable things. Here's the first question. I've seen a lot of head nodding, so I assume you know what I'm talking about. Do you have your own sense? We haven't talked about this a lot in my experience online or in the integral yoga. It's been 20, 30 years ago, sort of verboten, like, oh, don't talk about this stuff, It seems like people are willing to talk about it more. Do you have your own sense? Don't be afraid if it sounds silly, Your flowers are a little bit brighter than they used to be, whatever. Anyone want to jump in?
One of the things that really inspires me is about humanity in general is that so many people are no longer identifying as religious, but they identify as spiritual.
Yes.
I think that's a significant change.
Do you know, Martha, do you know the percentage now in the United States? They're spiritual but not religious?
It's pretty high, but I don't remember it.
It's a quarter of the population.
Oh, wow.
Actually, if you go under 30, it's like almost 40%. And do you notice, this is interesting, have you read religious people and scholars talking about how terrible, this is these young people's narcissism. They want to pick and choose. They don't want to submit to religious discipline. And you want to go, no, it's inspiring, right?
Yes, it is inspiring. They're really looking for something wider,
right,
and less confining and more truly universal.
Right.
And I think they're going to find it.
I think so. I don't think I mentioned this, but this morning when I was playing at Earth Fair, regular shopping mall, granted, it is Asheville, but there was about 8 people sitting at a table. And they kept coming over and making requests for different music, and I didn't know anything about them. I went over at one point. At the moment I went over, this one guy was giving a very eloquent discourse. He said, well, the Bible, you see, it's literal, then it's symbolic, then it's mythical, and then and he paused, and I said, like, contemplative. He goes, yes, and we had this long conversation about contemplation and different, these are Southern Baptist, so we had this conversation about, yes, there's this at that contemplative level. It's the same in all traditions, and we're going beyond that. And they had no problem with it.
That's marvelous, really marvelous.
Yeah.
We have a neighbor who's a Southern Baptist minister, retired, and we have some of our best conversations with him.
Right.
Because I think, especially since his retirement, and since he's not accountable, for dogma to a congregation,
Right.
his wider spirituality is coming out, and it's really marvelous.
It's wonderful. I noticed there's at least 3 people. We have 3 or 4 people from India or nearby. And I wonder if everyone here knows what we're talking about. As an American, I was assuming people know what we're talking about down south. So in the United States, traditionally, the most religiously conservative people often are found in the southeastern regions, not entirely. And they're often referred to as evangelicals. And there is actually, in the United States and around the world, inspired by Thomas Merton and Father Thomas Keating, there's a movement of contemplative prayer. And the conservative Christians will talk about this as being the devil. When you get your mind quiet, the devil comes in, right? Okay. But there's a whole group of recovering Baptists actually here in South Carolina who are looking for something more. So that's happening, yeah. Martha, thank you very much. Anyone else? Any personal observations?
Well, I'll contribute something here, Don. It's interesting because here at La Grasse before COVID, we would open our doors to the community. Right. And we would be giving integral yoga talks, and it was very surprising because we would have Baptists come in, we would have people from more of a Buddhistic background come and sit and listen and ask questions, Sufis. I mean, they were very open, even if we go to the extent of mentioning Sri Aurobindo and the mother, or they come through and they see pictures, Sri Aurobindo and the mother, right, and in our meditation. So I think this openness, and we're in the Bible Belt, right? Yes. This is the Deep South. Right. So we were very surprised because at first it was like, are they going to think we're a cult? Right. Is a community going to get up in arms? And it wasn't that at all.
So make sure everybody don't tell anyone that Sri Aurobindo's integral yoga is a cult, so we won't.
Yeah. But and the interesting thing is there's always a nice dialogue and exchange. Right. And we always find, most of the time, if we really listen, open our ears and listen and stand back and hold kind of our position back, we find entry points, right? Mm-hmm. Into kind of their dialogue, their way of seeing the world, their kind of background in spirituality, to introduce some of these concepts of integral yoga. And so there's a nice exchange of learning that happens both ways.
Let me just tell people, there may be a lot of people here who don't know Radhe, where she has the La Grasse Center there. So I just want to say quickly, Radhe, who does a lot of the management of this, it's an integral yoga center in South Carolina. And Vladimir Yatsenko is one of the resident, brilliant, inspired Sanskrit scholars. Much appreciate his work. He gives many of the presentations. But yes, they do give many presentations which one would not have thought would find receptivity in the American South. Jan and I moved to Greenville, which is about an hour away from La Grasse Center, in 2002. And we have ourselves noticed profound changes in receptivity in that area over the last 19 years. So again, I agree, Radhe, it's been rather amazing. Karun Das, you had a comment? Karun Das, you were?
Yeah. You sent out an email on Oricon email list asking for people to. I'm not going to go into some of the reactions against that, but you were asking that if people could have examples of noticing this shift that we're going through, this transitional shift worldwide. And I didn't have anything to say because for me it's it feels like the entire genre, the entire milieu that I live in is part of this shift. It's like I see it everywhere.
Yes.
I see it everywhere that I go. And it's true, I'm in a fairly liberal corner of the United States. But even so, you know, just people I talk to, people I see, people I meet,
Mm-hmm.
there's just such an openness and
Yeah.
such a sense of a non-judgmental awareness.
Mm-hmm.
And like Julian mentioned, this group of people that I sing with, I just walked in to you know, this group during the pandemic that gets together every afternoon to sing. A more welcoming, warm, open-hearted group of people you're not going to meet, and to my knowledge, none of them identifies as spiritual.
Right.
But you know, people will bring songs that are, you know, church hymns or songs about, you know, God. And sometimes people will say, well, let's change the word God to the word nature. But it's
Right.
more of a sense of, yeah, it's more of a sense of being more inclusive,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and not being restrictive.
Right.
So, yeah, I didn't have any specific examples except that
That was
everything
perfect.
seems to be going in that direction.
That was
And
perfect.
it's a good thing, too, because the world itself, like you say, is just filled with this dust of mother sweeping. I love that example.
Right.
Um, and it can get scary sometimes, and it can get
Yeah.
concerning sometimes.
And
But I
hold
always
up.
try to remind myself, you know, of
That's a
what the
great,
sign
that's a great point. Okay. Will everyone admit to fear occasionally coming up, seeing the things happening in the world? Ever in the last year? Fear? Okay. All right. That is gold. That is, I don't necessarily mean supermental gold, but that in terms of transformation, that is gold. That's the point where you recognize. So here the fear comes up, right? I see new variant of, COVID comes up. It's now transmissible by thinking, whatever. And the fear comes up, And again, those of us who are perfect supermentalized yogis don't experience this, but the rest of us, right? And the aversion to the fear and the little spiritual ego that says, I'm above that. All of that is gold. And that's the moment to remember, I can't fix this. I can't figure this out. Let the mind settle, tune into the aspiration, and then, Mother, do what you will. I've heard this young man, 31, that Jan and I have been studying with recently. He has a wonderful way of speaking of this. Let's say you have a particularly extraordinarily painful something surface, incredibly anger that is so intense and so dreadful to your spiritual ego. I cannot be this anger. That comes up. Okay. And he'll give the image, let your surrender be so complete that if you had 45 lifetimes of persistent experience with the anger, it's perfectly fine because you're so surrendered, saying, Mother, if that's to be there, let it be there. If it's to be transformed this moment, let it be transformed. But it's up to you. And you can recognize the desire to let it go away, to make it go away. And Mother, I can't control that desire either. You do what you do with that. And so you have an opportunity every moment. Waking life then becomes a transmutation game. It's a transformation game. Every moment, there's not a single moment when you don't have some tension in the vital, the physical, and that can be a reminder rather than like, oh God, when is this back pain going to go away? It's like, oh, yes, let go, let the aspiration. Mother, this is yours to do with as you wish. Let this go immediately. Let it go on for infinite lifetimes. It is not my concern. This is for you. And then all of life, and to me also, it's very inspiring to recognize that this also, not as you, Karun Das, or me as Don, or Tom or Charles or Martha or Wendy or whatever. But this is this instrument serving this shift, serving the collective evolution. And then life becomes a flow of grace. Even, we think of flow, don't we? Doesn't everyone, when you hear life is a flow of grace, oh, it's all wonderful, everything. That's not it. In the midst of the worst challenges, the things we psychologists, oh, trauma, that's different. No, it's not different. I would say at least 500 of the 2,000. So I talk about this with such ease. Sometimes people remind me, Don, you can't talk so calmly about this to a big audience, but at least 500 of the 2,000 people I interviewed over 15 years for disability evaluations were women who had been physically, sexually, mentally, abused for years, shot at, thrown off buildings, locked in freezers. I'm giving you real life examples. And there was very rarely one, I would use Baptist language. We'd be crying together and sitting together, and I'd wait a long time before I'd ask them questions. And I'd say, where is Christ? Well, what do you mean, where is Christ? And I'd invite them to go into their hearts. And to a person, they get it. And they'd all say, why didn't my pastor ever tell me this? But yeah, whatever trauma, whatever nightmare, whatever, I've had worked with veterans in a VA hospital. His buddy was killed next to him when they encountered a car bomb. And he had moments. The first patient I had, the first patient in my internship, declared that she wanted to kill herself. And by law, I couldn't let her go home. She had to be hospitalized. When she came out of the hospital, I asked her how it was, and she said there was a bench outside in this green area in the hospital. And the one place where she found solace was by this huge oak tree. And she referred to it as the tree at the end of the earth. And when she said that, this presence just filled the room. And I said, are you aware of something? And she goes like, yeah, let's just sit with that. So for 9 months, all I did really, I didn't do any formal therapy. I just kept reminding her, where's your tree? Where is that tree at the end of the earth? And she went through such changes, and it wasn't me, it wasn't her, it wasn't the therapy, just like that presence. She was something, the letting go in deciding to end your life allowed her to open to that. And would that have happened the same way 50 years ago? Perhaps, perhaps not, or 100 years ago. There are more and more of these openings. And do you all know the word Shraddha? Beautiful, so much more beautiful to me than faith. Jan, you remember what does Sri Aurobindo call it? The light of the yet unrisen sun, is that it? Shraddha. Yes, it's the light of the soul that may not be fully visible to you, but it's there in our hearts. That when you're walking around and cultivating that sense of the faith that this collective evolution is happening and that this mind and body can be an instrument, that faith alone allows you to be more of an instrument. I see Vladimir has raised his hand. Vladimir.
Right. Yes. I was thinking with your kind of comparison of where we have to embrace the heights and the abyss, and the depth of the inconscient is responding to the heights and actually calling to the heights.
Yeah.
That's why we have this rising upsurge of the whole darkness. You can see it in the world today. It is all over. It's not only in the US, but look at other countries. It's really immense, a very powerful upsurge of falsehood. But falsehood like 1 minute falsehood. Every time 1 minute falsehood. It doesn't have a long breath. It lives for a moment and disappears immediately. Yeah. And I just found this beautiful passage just to support from Savitri. When Savitri receives the boons from the Lord. he doesn't give her the way out, an escape. He doesn't give her kind of the world of paradise where you would eat and enjoy yourself forever and hear only beautiful music and have the sweet ocean of milk, and that's it. It's not the world which will become. It is a very different, and I want to read a small passage if you don't mind.
Please do, yes. Like, let me just say before you read it, I think probably 90%, but there may be a few people here. Savitri is Sri Aurobindo's epic poem, which he spent over 30 years working on. It's the longest poem in the English language, and it's basically in one sentence symbolic of the descent of the Divine Mother for the transformation of the world.
Yes, when he gives her this gift of being always with her, Sri Aurobindo is usually having this kind of idea. He has it in Perseus the Deliverer, when Andromeda also is to be sacrificed to that monster, and and Athena, the Divine Mother, comes to her and she tells her that she will be hated in this world and the next, and there will be no escape from this hate. Right. and pain. And she asks her, and will you be with me? And Athena says, yes, I will always be with you. And she says, then I am ready. I'm ready to be cursed and to be sacrificed, forever hated. This is something of that motive which Sri Aurobindo has in Savitri, the same. When the Lord gives her boons, this is the speech he gives her. I am taking only that passage which fits, which is very beautiful, huge passage, but only small. A swimmer lost between two leaping seas, by my outer pains and inner sweetnesses, finding my joy in my opposite mysteries, thou shalt respond to me from every nerve. A vision shall compel thy coursing breath. Thy heart shall drive thee on the wheel of works. Thy mind shall urge thee through the flames of thought to meet me in the abyss and on the heights, to feel me in the tempest and the calm, to love me in the noble and the vile, in beautiful things and terrible desire. This is something what we don't expect this word to come in this format. We believe.
Let me make a comment about one line there. So I heard the line, "He responds from every nerve." And immediately, now here's an example of an opportunity for transmutation. As that came up, there was an awareness of the residue of renunciate attitudes, and an awareness that there's still this deep in the subconscious, the idea that spirituality means like, up there in the space of the mind, or maybe deep in the heart, but not the body. And that thing respond from every nerve. It's the body. This is the core, to me, one of the core of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother's message, that it's not just the mind, the heart, and the vital that will be transformed, but every we will respond from every nerve. And this is all of us. It's not just her, separate individual. It's the Divine Mother. There's a on the fifth letter, Sri Aurobindo wrote 6 letters on the Mother to a disciple in 1927 who asked about who the Mother was. In the 5th letter, he goes through stages. I'm not sure, people haven't talked about this too much. He starts where you're the doer. Okay, I'm the one going around. It's me, it's Don, and that's fine. That's all part of the play. I'm going to open my heart, get my mind together, right? And he talks about, I'm using my own words, this shift where it's no longer you, the doer. You're not this mind and body. You realize yourself, and this is the instrument. Now notice there's still a subtle duality there. And he says in the final stage, there is nothing but the divine Shakti, moving through, moving as, moving in everything, everything moving in the Shakti moving in everything, and the Shakti as everything and beyond. So to get back to that, respond from every nerve. This is the divine Shakti and the quote unquote individual Shakti, just like resonating, vibrating, shimmering. Yeah. Thank you so much. It's such a beautiful passage. I think someone else had their hand. I can't see it.
There was Karun Das before, but
yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. Any other thoughts, questions, passages? I haven't heard any complaints or arguments yet. Okay. I won't get a chance to argue this time. You're right. You were wrong. Oh, actually, I can, little light note. My email is up below. I gently offered on, people don't know. So Karun Das mentioned Oro Conference. Oro Conference is an online group that's been around over 20 years. And let's just say, I'll say politely, it's got a bit more intense last few years and kind of closed down. Anyway, I dropped a note. I thought, well, let people know about this. And there was this flurry of arguments and intense things about, this is the yoga, that's the yoga. Don, what you're doing is not the yoga. It's all bullshit, whatever. So this is all part of the mother's play. Thank you for bringing that up, Karun Das. Yeah. Charles. Yes. Hey.
Well, I'm glad to be on to this call. So many of them on the West Coast ends up being like 5:30 in the morning, trying to coordinate between Oroville and New York, and then we're 3 hours behind that. So, but I'm so glad to be on this one. One thing that is, so with your work doing, in Asheville and in Greenville, one thing that I find really what really striking is that since you're doing it like you say in the heart of the South and explaining concepts that people feel and hear, but and we can relate in integral yoga in our own way, but the languaging is very different. It's like you have to sort of use a different word. So maybe, how's Christ or something like that, asking them, and they can relate with that. And so I guess my question is really about, integral yoga, as we've been doing it over the last 30 years in the United States. We have these AUMs, and, a lot of us are getting older. And I was just kind of wondering, it's starting to happen a little bit. I remember when I was in my 20s just coming to AUMs, and now it's like, it's changed. So really about the connection and accessibility to integral yoga and languaging, because here we are in the social media, people are doing things in 140 characters. They're, everything is fast paced, and Sri Aurobindo is anything but that. It's like, his sentences are paragraphs, and it's really about a larger concept, manifold thoughts simultaneously, and how do people find their way to Sri Aurobindo, particularly in this age, or even come to AUMs and find this, right? It's like we each had our own ways in which we felt guided. Maybe a light divine hit us on the head in the library or something, or whatever, or someone gave you the adventure of consciousness. So, but yeah, it's like how does that sort of transmit? I know a lot of this conference is focused on Oroville, and maybe for some people that's one way because they connect with certain elements of the project in Oroville. But it's like, what does that look like to you today, since you're doing so much of that sort of work in a place where you wouldn't think naturally it's a place that gravitates a bunch of integral yogis, or
great question. So I wonder how many people are familiar. In 1970, the mother made a really wonderful prediction. She said in 50 years, which is say it was like now, last year, this year, in 50 years, everyone will be familiar with the work of Sri Aurobindo. Now, wait a minute. What? Right? Who's okay? In 50 years, everyone will be familiar with the work of Sri Aurobindo, but they won't necessarily, maybe very few who know it's Sri Aurobindo. This to me is the key. And there's one more key. And this has been a guide for me since 1976. And just well, I guess I can say to mention one of the complaints I've gotten, but the arguments, the differences I've had in the integral yoga with the community for decades, when people say, why are you doing this? You should be teaching the integral yoga, not this sort of watered down stuff. So this, you think usually quoting the mother works, it doesn't always, but when the mother wrote the bulletins, okay, I need to tell people. So in the late, I believe it's late 1940s, maybe the early 50s, the mother wrote a series of essays on education. I had been interested when I found them for over a decade in education. I read tons on it. To this day, I've never found anything on education that's as inspiring as what she wrote. But here's what she said. She said, in these essays, I am not writing them for people who are consciously doing yoga. I'm writing them for many people who would consider themselves materialists and would be outraged to hear yogic language. So I could say in a word, what I've been aspiring to do since I was 17 and what Jen and I have been doing for the last 20 years is really following out for this time what the mother was doing herself in her essays in education. So to get directly to your question, yeah, like Karundas said, it doesn't have to be, how many people are going to read 2-page long paragraphs, or sentences, But when I hear my aerobics teacher talk about, we study with an aerobics teacher who herself is multi-ethnic, mixed Black, Hispanic, a whole bunch of things. And she works with multi-ethnics here in Asheville. Asheville, which by the way, is the most highly segregated city in North Carolina. So much for being a progressive city. But she works there and she would just sort of throw in things during class that were like luminous, beautiful, inspired things that are almost as inspiring as anything I've ever heard in AUM, and that could have been heard anytime, but my sense again is that there's more of this. For example, the YWCA, where we took our classes, it was begun in 1905 primarily by African Americans who were, living extremely challenging lives here in the South. It's been a center for, peace and justice and fighting the good fight for the last 120 years. And I have noticed I've kept up with their offerings, and you see over 10 years, more and more offerings in tune with, just mindfulness, breathing, whatever, even the sort of cliche pop wellness stuff has little hints. Let me offer you a phrase. See if I can, Jan, help me out if I don't do this well. Our teacher, Andrew, has been using this phrase. If you think of spiritual, Martha mentioned it, spiritual but not religious. There are concealed aspects of this new spirituality and revealed aspects. So the concealed aspect of spiritual but not religious is there are many people who want it to make themselves feel better. They want to lord over other people. They come into every activity. It doesn't make the thing itself any less of a sign of this collective change. Then there are people who tune in more to the revealed aspect of it. Let's take Donald Trump, for example. Donald Trump, if you look at how he ran on most extremely progressive issues way to the left of Hillary Clinton. Not the cultural stuff, but the economic issues he ran on were very populist, very left-wing. Now, does left-wing mean better? No. But he was speaking in his own bizarre, concealed way very, 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 very concealed perhaps. He was speaking truth amidst the same falsehoods Vladimir talked about. Now, this sounds crazy, but if you look at any of this darkness, what is the Tantra says? That by which you fall is that by which you rise. Let me see if I get the Latin. In Christianity, daemon est deus inverso. The devil is just the inversion of God. That's the concealed and revealed. It's a nice little game. Look around you. Look at the news, look at the media, look at your neighborhood, whatever. And instead of saying, well, this is the dust, just the dust, this is like amazing, look at all of it and say, this is the dust. How is that concealing the light? How is that the light itself coming forward but concealed? Then you have a whole different, you move more towards non-duality then. You move back to the fifth letter on the mother. It's all the divine Shakti, which doesn't, as in the old era, it doesn't erase our individuality, it lifts it up. As in the Gita, where Krishna says, you are an eternal, to Arjuna, you are an eternal portion of my being. Not as separate, but as the divine Shakti. Okay. I didn't think I'd go off on all that, but anyway. Yeah. Thank you, Charles. Beautiful stuff. Beautiful stuff. I think we're nearing the end of our passing end of our time. I would like to say, as I always do when I give presentations, I always feel like this is so much more. It's so much more for me than for you guys, but I am so grateful. It's such a delight. Last week I shared at La Grasse to a general public about our course, but this is very special. As I was saying to Jan before, I said, as wonderful it is talking that way at La Grasse, I'm sort of monitoring, like, well, I can't talk about this. Don't mention that. Be careful here. Here it's like, wow. It's so all out in the open, and such beautiful receptivity. And in that little moment of silence we had, your beauty and love and devotion it was so beautiful and so in the air. So I'm very grateful. Julian, thank you so much for being the organizing guru of this.
Most welcome. Thank you, Don and Jan. And I did post your website in the chat for those of you who haven't looked or clicked or seen the whiteboard, remembertobreathe.org. And there's just so much music.
Remember to be. Breathe is the old one. Be. Just be. We've evolved. It used to be breathe. We've evolved now. It's just be.